This is the transition room from the old 1906 building, which we're going to tour, to the new addition that's behind you. And it was in the mid-90s that they built this. And I'll just stall for a couple of minutes because we always get a few latecomers here. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Bob Foster. I'm the president of the Fairhaven High School Alumni Association. I graduated from this institution in 1966, about 56 years ago. Go on and do the math. And I started doing these tours probably around 2008, I think it was, quite by accident. They've gone over pretty well, and I keep getting more and more people each year because we had 2 years of pandemic that they wouldn't let me in here. But so now that we've redone them, on the Friday tours, I do some Friday ones after July 4th for a few weeks. The custodians and the principal are kind enough to let they start cleaning the addition over there, and then after I get through my tours in about 3 weeks, they pull all the chairs and desks out of the classrooms so the hallways are all cluttered, so they don't want me walking around with people. Plus the custodians are out there with their mops and buckets and everything. So when we go into the building, keep in mind they haven't cleaned it yet. Right? So when you don't see any graffiti or if you don't see the place all dirty, there's kind of a silent respect for the old building. The custodians actually told me that they have more problems. They get more like little pen marks and magic marker stuff in the addition than they do over here. They built an addition to the original high school in 1935, which was in the Depression, and it wasn't anything like this school, like the old school. It was a pretty basic brick building, very plain, no style to it at all. It was totally functional. They needed more classrooms, but they didn't attach it to the school. There was a tunnel that went from the old gym underground to the addition. And for years, I was on the school committee in the 70s and the 80s, and for years what we were told was that it was in the will that Henry Huddleston Rogers left. Because when Rogers gave these buildings to the town, the library, for example, there were conditions with the buildings he gave. The library, Nelson Library, he didn't give it to the town of Fairhaven, he gave it to the people of the town of Fairhaven. Right? And it was a very distinct difference in that. He didn't trust the town to take care of his beautiful library, so he gave it to the people. And he set up some conditions on how it was going to be run. And the town, of course, accepted all the conditions. They weren't crazy, they weren't going to tear this down. And the high school was the same thing. And it was a covenant that Henry Huddleston Rogers got the town to sign. And for years, what I was told, and everybody else believed, was that one of the conditions was you couldn't put an addition onto the school, which made sense, especially when you saw the addition they did build, right, which was walk through the tunnel away. But that building was, by the mid-90s, that building was in horrendous shape. And this building was still in solid shape structurally, but the problem they had was they were put on probation by the New England Association of Schools and Colleges for 3 major defects that they had. One was the science labs. The science labs in the old building were antiquated, and they really weren't up to standard. Second problem was the library. The old library, which we're going to go into in a little while. The old library was beautiful. It's got a working fireplace, hand-carved oak, the absolutely gorgeous room. But for the 20th century, for the 21st century coming up, it wasn't going to make it. They couldn't get enough computers in there, for one thing. Now libraries have to have computers, of course, and the library is actually right up there on the 2nd floor. It's kind of like a peninsula jutting out from the building. It's a beautiful location overlooking Huddleston Avenue here. The problem is, this building is all built of granite, and they can't get a Wi-Fi signal up there for anything. And even a few years ago, they finally put fiber optics in the building. Well, there are stories that come from the guys about trying to drill through the granite. I mean, they knew it was going to be difficult. They knew it was going to be thick. They didn't realize it was going to be 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet thick in places, And they had an unbelievably hard time trying to do that. So that was the third problem, was getting technology. Because now in Massachusetts, many of you that are teachers know, or have been teachers, that they want one-on-one as far as computers go, a ratio. If you've got 800 students in the school, they want access to 800 computers for the students. And now, of course, they've all got Chromebooks, and all this stuff. But back in the 90s, Chromebooks hadn't been invented yet, I don't think. So they were trying, a computer was a PC, and they wanted PCs enough so that every student could be on a PC at any given time. Okay, so they had those three major defects. So what the town of Fairhaven did was, they decided they wanted to build an addition. But the problem was, they didn't think they could build an addition and attach it to the school, right? So they tried to find a covenant, that will, that everybody had heard about. Okay, so that's another story I'll tell you when we get down to the other side of the building. Okay, they finally did get permission to build an addition, a new addition, so they tore down that old addition that was on Lodge Avenue. They tore that thing down, and the architect that they hired to do this job decided to, he had two things. He's going to add classrooms, but he's also going to add laboratories, and he's going to add, somehow correct the library situation, right? So he was going to come up with a plan as how he was going to do that, okay? And the town of Fairhaven got behind the whole project because, of course, the high school is on probation, and that's not a good thing when your students are going to be applying to go to colleges if your school's not accredited. And they were just on probation, hadn't lost their accreditation yet, but they were close. Okay. So the architect, Earl Flansburgh, who did this, and I'll talk about two architects. Henry Holston Rogers' architect was Charles Brigham. He was from Watertown, Massachusetts. He designed most of the buildings. The only one he didn't do for Rogers was the Rogers School. Starting with the Millicent Library, and then the Town Hall, the Unitarian Church, this school. Brigham did all of his buildings. Brigham, to give you an idea of how good he was, he has 72 buildings that he designed that are on the National Register of Historic Places. Most of them in New York and Boston, and then 9 in Fairhaven. Right? We're in third place behind those two places. So he also did Rogers Mansion that he built down by Fort Phoenix. He also did Rogers House in New York City too. So there's his personal architect basically, plus a lot of other good folks. And when Rogers built the building in 1906, he told Brigham there was no budget. He told him to build the most beautiful high school in America. And his friend, Rogers' friend Thomas Tripp, who was the chairman of the school committee and had gone to school with Rogers, he was working with Brigham to let him know what the best high school in America would have for science labs, gymnasium, libraries, all those sort of things. Okay, but no budget. Imagine an architect with no budget. So then you can hire European craftsmen to come in and carve into the oak that you're going to put in, that sort of thing. Now, Earl Flansburgh, who was hired to be the architect for the addition, had a budget. Okay? And imagine an architect who gets the job of adding on to this beautiful school, but then it suddenly hits him like, this could be career ending for me rather than career, awards, because with a budget, how am I possibly going to add on to this school and have it be something that people will actually marvel at, or be satisfied with? Okay, so he had quite a job to do. So the first thing that he did, he came up with this concept of the rotunda. Because how do you make a transition? You just slap the building right up against this granite over here. So he designed this rotunda, which from the outside has got a slate roof. It's got the pointed, it's kind of an English castle look to it. So this was designed to be the transition from the old building over here to the new one. Okay? And he put a few touches in. If you turn around and look behind you, you see the brick there, the brick that he put there. That's the only brick that's in the old building inside. When you get down into the classroom, you go through those doors, the classrooms are all cement blocks that are painted beige with drop ceilings. It's like any school in America. That's because of the budget he had, right? But he tried to put some touches of the brick, and you see the brick that's on the second and third levels floors of the original building. He tried to match that brick as close as he could. And you'll notice that he put touches of oak here and there. He couldn't afford to have hand carving, but he did the oak that he could. Now, if you step into Rotunda, you can probably see these stained glass windows. I'll just mention what they are. They're not original. People sometimes think that they came with the old school. You can see that they've got, for example, a class of 61 here, that because Henry's sure that that's the best one there is, okay, right? It's obvious. Class of 61 had that one done. The same artist did all of these stained glass windows except for one. And there's some more that you're going to see as you walk down this way. But there's just one that's different from the others. I'll give you a second to figure out which one it is. What they're all about, the artist was Susan Bavarian in the class of 73. And she is a stained glass artist. She lives up in New Hampshire, and she decided to do one for the high school, and she gave it to them as a gift from her class. It's actually up over the front window. You can't see it from here. You'll see it on the second floor when we end the tour. Well, Natalie Hemingway from the class of 48 saw it, and she said, "Oh, I want my class to have one like that." Who did this? You know, the school gave her information. So she had one done. She hung hers up right next to that artist in the front. Okay. So then the class of 61, the class of 63, 54, they all heard about it, and they all started doing it. So the artist ended up being commissioned. It was about $3,000 to do each one of these. And the classes had various ways of raising money. And the artist just had one rule. Every window had to be different. For example, Henry Huddleston Rogers went in a window for the class of 61. That's the only window he's in. She would not do him again. And the class of 61 also put Mark Twain in that one too. That's Mark Twain on the left, who was a good friend of Rogers. So they took two characters and put them in one window, which a lot of people later thought was unfair, because that used up two ideas right there. And the other thing was, each one had to have a message from that class to the students that are here. The message of the window isn't hooray for the class of 61. Right. The message of 61 is friendships. And then you have the class of 54 here is Carpe Diem. Carpe Diem is that Latin phrase, seize the day. And that's the logo that's over one of the front portico itself, in front of the building. The porch is in front. And Ad Astra, the class of 63, who took that one, that means to the stars, and that's over the other portico. Okay? And the window that wasn't done by Susan Bavarian, you probably figured it out already. This one up here, it just doesn't look the same. Fort Phoenix. It was quarried out of Fort Phoenix, about a mile south of here. Okay? And the basement floor and the first floor are all granite. Okay? It was all dragged up there in wagons by teams of horses. Okay? Now Rogers wanted to build, okay? And it's in the library, it's up in the ceiling of the library. And it happened about 105 years after it was built. No building inspector, no plans, right? This building, of course, required all kinds of inspections and everything. It started leaking, but the best part is they can't find the source of the